Get out, you filthy black maid! What are you doing to my son? The voice cut through the warm spring air like a blade, slicing through the sound of the fountain's steady trickle. It was deep, cold, and sharpened by the kind of authority that had rarely been questioned in this courtyard. Elena Brooks froze where she knelt, her palms still steadying the small frame of Caleb Lawson. His knees wobbled over the smooth flagstones, arms outstretched like a fledgling bird testing its wings. He had taken 3 steps, not clumsy but cautious, toward the fountain's edge before she caught him, a gentle hand at his elbow to keep him from falling. She turned her head slowly. Daniel Lawson stood at the far end of the courtyard, his tailored navy suit immaculate despite the afternoon breeze that lifted the edges of his jacket. His expression was a sculpted mask of disdain, the kind that had been perfected in boardrooms and charity galas. His eyes, however, burned with something hotter than mere annoyance. Caleb stiffened. "Uncle." But Daniel was already moving, the click of his polished leather shoes loud against the stones. Each step felt measured, but the anger radiating from him made the air thick. "I said," he repeated, now towering over them. "What do you think you're doing?" Elena rose slowly to her feet, not out of fear but to put herself between Caleb and the sting of Daniel's words. She could still feel the boy's trembling in the faint grip of his small hand on her wrist. He was about to— "You overstep," Daniel cut in. "You overstep your role and you forget your place." Her spine straightened. She knew better than to fire back in this moment, not because she lacked the courage, but because Caleb's wide, watchful eyes were locked on both of them, and his world had seen enough confrontation. Daniel reached for Caleb's shoulder, pulling the boy toward him with a firmness that made Caleb wince. "You're here to keep him safe, not to insert yourself. This isn't your child." Caleb's voice was small but fierce. "She makes me feel brave." The words hung between them, almost ridiculous in their simplicity. Brave. Daniel's jaw tightened. His hand on Caleb's shoulder remained, but his gaze flickered, just for a heartbeat, as if something about the boy's choice of words had struck too close to home. Then the mask returned. "That's enough," Daniel said, and with a tug, he pulled Caleb away from her. The boy stumbled slightly, his gait still uncertain, but Daniel did not slow. They crossed the courtyard and disappeared into the shadowed hall of the main house, the heavy oak door closing behind them with a soft but final thud. Elena stood alone by the fountain, her reflection broken by the rippling water. She could hear faint laughter from the kitchen windows across the garden, staff who had undoubtedly seen the encounter. Whispers would follow, like they always did. She was used to it, but this time a heat burned behind her eyes. Not from humiliation, she had faced worse, but from the ache of seeing Caleb shrink under the weight of his uncle's voice. That night, the estate was quieter than usual. The Lawson mansion was a place built for entertaining, but without guests. Its silence became oppressive. Corridors stretched on like endless hallways in a museum, the air tinged with the faint scent of polished wood and old money. Daniel sat in his study, a glass of bourbon untouched beside the leather-bound ledger he had been reviewing. The fire in the hearth cast slow-moving shadows across the walls, but his attention was fixed on the wide screen before him, security footage. He rarely watched it himself, that was the head of security's job, but something about the way Caleb had been looking at Elena that afternoon had unsettled him. The boy's tone. The word, brave. With a flick of the mouse, he rewound the camera feed for the courtyard. The view was wide, the fountain at the center, spring sunlight soft on the stone paths. He saw Caleb, saw the boy step forward, hesitating at first, then again, then again. His arms stretched out like he had been told 100 times to do in physical therapy, but there was no therapist here, No parallel bars, no carefully cushioned mat, just open space. And Elena. She wasn't guiding him by the hand. She wasn't pulling him forward. She stood a short distance away, hands ready but not reaching, watching him with a quiet encouragement in her posture. And then, Daniel leaned in. Caleb's foot planted, his knee straightened, and he pushed off into the next step. It was awkward, but it was unaided. By the time Caleb reached her, Daniel could see the boy's face lit with something he had never seen before. Pride. Not in himself alone, but in the fact that someone had believed he could do it without holding on. Elena's hands came down gently, steadying him only after the step was complete. Not before. Daniel sat back in his chair. The bourbon remained untouched. He thought of the countless specialists he had hired, the expensive rehabilitation programs, the hours of structured exercises that Caleb had resisted. All the money in the world, and yet this moment, captured in grainy black and white security footage, was something they had never achieved. Shame rose slowly, uncomfortably, from somewhere deep. He had humiliated her in front of staff. He had dismissed her place in Caleb's life. And yet here she was, in this recording, helping his nephew take steps that had been declared months away by the most credentialed experts in the city. Daniel reached for the glass of bourbon, then thought better of it. He shut the video feed down, but the image of Caleb, that small, determined figure moving toward Elena, lingered like an afterimage burned into the back of his mind. In the quiet of his study, the truth settled heavily. For the first time in a long while, Daniel Lawson wasn't entirely certain he was right. Daniel Lawson had never been a man to backtrack. In his world, retreat meant weakness, and weakness was the first crack through which others pried open an empire. Yet the image from the night before, Caleb's hesitant, unaided steps toward Elena Brooks, refused to leave him. It had followed him into sleep, invaded his dreams, and been the first thing he saw in his mind when he opened his eyes that morning. By noon, he found himself standing outside the staff wing. The hallway here was narrow, the walls painted an unremarkable cream. The polished oak and marble of the main house gave way to practical tile and scuffed baseboards. Somewhere down the hall, a washing machine hummed. He almost turned back. Daniel had faced corporate mergers worth billions without flinching, negotiated with men who would happily destroy him for sport. But now, with his hand hovering near the doorframe of a modest apartment in his own estate, he hesitated. He knocked. A moment later, the door opened, and there she was. Elena Brooks wore a faded blue sweater and dark jeans, her hair pulled back loosely. No uniform. No pretense. Behind her, the small apartment was tidy but sparse. A two-seater couch, a coffee table stacked with children's books, a kettle whistling softly in the background. Her eyes landed on him, and he could see the flicker of surprise quickly buried under caution. "Mr. Lawson." "Daniel," he corrected before he could think better of it. "May I come in?" She stepped aside, but her posture didn't soften. He entered, feeling absurdly out of place, as though the walls themselves were measuring him and finding him unwelcome. "I came to—" He stopped, the words sticking in his throat. His instinct was to dress them in formality, to make it sound like a calculated decision. But the truth, bare, without armor, was harder. "I was wrong yesterday." Her brows lifted slightly, but she didn't speak. "I saw the footage," he continued. "Of the courtyard. Caleb walking." His voice dropped, losing some of its practiced precision. "You got him to do something no one else has." Finally, she crossed her arms. "And that's surprising to you?" He deserved that. "I misjudged you," he said. His eyes flicked briefly to the window, where the winter light slanted in. I don't want my pride to cost Caleb what he clearly gets from you. The kettle behind her began to whistle more insistently. She turned, switched it off, and set it aside before facing him again. You heard him yesterday, she said. Not just with your words to me. He heard you call me filthy. Do you understand what that does to a child who's learning what people are worth? He drew in a breath. Yes, I do now. She studied him, weighing whether this was an apology or an attempt to smooth the surface until it reflected what he wanted to see. I'm not coming back for you, she said at last. I'm coming back for Caleb. His progress, his trust, they come first. If the family image is ever put above his needs again, I'm gone, and you won't get another conversation like this. For a moment, the air between them felt taut, the faint scent of tea leaves steeping in the kettle mingling with the sharper edge of truth. Daniel nodded slowly. Agreed. When Elena returned to the main house later that afternoon, whispers stirred in the hallways. Staff looked up from silver polishing and linen folding to watch her pass. A few nodded discreetly, others exchanged glances as if a story was writing itself right in front of them. She found Caleb in the sunroom, crouched on the rug with a stack of building blocks. The moment he saw her, his face lit with unrestrained joy. Elena! He scrambled to his feet, without reaching for the arm of the chair beside him, and crossed the small distance into her arms. She steadied him, just as she had by the fountain, but this time he needed almost no help. You've been practicing, she said softly. He nodded, eyes bright. I wanted to show you. From the doorway, Daniel watched silently, his arms folded, not in judgment this time, but as if holding himself still to take in the scene. He had made 100 speeches in his life to investors, politicians, and rivals, but none of them had felt as significant as those few unscripted words exchanged between the two people in front of him. Elena glanced up, meeting his eyes briefly before turning back to Caleb. Come on, she said. Let's see how far you can go today. As the boy began his careful walk across the rug, Daniel felt a strange, unfamiliar sensation take root. The quiet relief of knowing he had done at least one thing right that day. The invitation arrived embossed in silver, the kind of paper that carried its own weight. Daniel Lawson set it on the breakfast table as Elena poured Caleb's orange juice. A charity gala, he said, his tone casual but calculated. Next Saturday night, we'll be attending. Elena didn't look up immediately. She finished pouring, set the glass in front of Caleb, then straightened. We? Daniel nodded. I want people to see his progress. Her brow furrowed. Daniel, Caleb's still adjusting to walking on his own. Crowds, flashing cameras, strange faces. This isn't the right setting. It's the perfect setting, he countered. Influential people, donors, medical contacts. If they see what he's accomplished, it could open doors. Or close them, she said evenly. If he freezes up in front of all those people, they'll only see what he can't do. Their eyes locked, and for a moment the air between them carried the echo of the courtyard confrontation, though this time it was quieter, measured. From his chair, Caleb looked between them. Will there be music? Daniel softened slightly. Yes. And cake? Elena crouched beside him. There will be a lot of people watching, Caleb. It might be loud. Are you sure you'd like to go? The boy hesitated, then nodded. If you come with me. Her expression shifted, the firm line of her mouth easing just enough to let the boy's trust through. The night of the gala, the Lawson limousine pulled up to the Grand Meridian Hotel, its glass facade reflecting the city's winter lights. Inside, chandeliers dripped gold onto marble floors, and the air hummed with polite laughter and the clink of champagne flutes. Daniel, in a black tuxedo, stepped out first, offering a hand to Caleb, who emerged in a tailored navy suit. Elena followed, wearing a simple but elegant black dress that drew eyes not for its price tag, but for the quiet confidence she carried. They entered together, and the whispering began almost instantly. "Is that the caretaker? She's closer to the boy than the uncle. It's unusual, isn't it?" Caleb's hand tightened around Elena's. She felt the small tremor of nerves in his fingers and bent slightly to whisper, "Eyes on me, not them." They moved through the crowd slowly, Daniel making practiced stops to greet acquaintances. At one table, an older man in a white dinner jacket leaned down to Caleb. "You must be the Lawson heir," he said, glancing at Elena with a smile too thin to be kind. "And you are—" Before Elena could answer, Daniel's voice cut cleanly through the room. "The reason he's walking at all." The man blinked. "Pardon?" Daniel rested a hand on Caleb's shoulder. "This is Elena Brooks. She's the one responsible for my nephew's turnaround. If you want to talk about progress, you talk to her." The moment hung there, and somewhere behind them, the whispering faltered. Caleb's face brightened, his shoulders straightening. Elena felt the boy lean into her side slightly, not out of dependency, but pride. Later that evening, as a small quartet played near the stage, Daniel caught Elena's eye from across the room. He gave the faintest nod, an unspoken acknowledgment that tonight had not been about him, not entirely. When they finally left, Caleb dozed in the limousine, his head resting against Elena's arm. Daniel sat opposite them, silent, watching the city lights streak past the windows. The gala had been his idea, his stage, but for the first time, he understood what it felt like to step aside and let someone else take the spotlight. The knock on Daniel's office door was light but deliberate, the kind that didn't seek permission so much as announce presence. He didn't have to look up to know who it was. The faint scent of bergamot and something sharper, like cold metal, told him before her heels clicked into the room. "Victoria!" "Daniel." She closed the door behind her with a precision that made the sound almost inaudible. In her world, even silence was controlled. Her coat, dove-gray cashmere, slid from her shoulders like water, revealing a fitted black dress that might have been tailored in Paris. "I saw the photos," she began without preamble. Daniel leaned back in his chair. "Which ones?" Her smile was quick and cold. "From the gala. You, Caleb, and her." He felt the weight of the word, her, as if it carried something unclean. "Elena," he said deliberately, as though daring her to use the name. "Yes, Elena," Victoria replied, the name curling in her mouth as though it were a foreign coin she didn't trust. "The caretaker who now stands beside our nephew as though she's family. She's responsible for more of his progress than any doctor we've hired." Victoria's brows arched. "That may be true in private, but you've now made it public. You credited her in front of donors, society members, the board of the Children's Rehabilitation Foundation. Do you understand what that does to the Lawson image?" Daniel's jaw set. "If our image can't survive honesty, then maybe it's worth less than I thought." She crossed the room, her heels barely whispering on the carpet, and set her palms on the edge of his desk. "Appearances are not optional in this family, Daniel. They are currency. You've just devalued us." His voice was calm but steely. "No, Victoria. I've just stopped pretending that the currency matters more than the child we're supposed to protect." Elena was in the sunroom with Caleb when Victoria found her later that afternoon. The boy was stacking wooden blocks, his focus so intense he didn't notice the shift in atmosphere when the tall, perfectly composed woman appeared in the doorway. "You must be Elena," Victoria said, her voice smooth enough to be mistaken for polite. Elena rose slowly. "And you must be Victoria." Victoria's gaze swept the room, taking in the modest play area as though cataloging flaws. My brother speaks highly of you these days. That's new. I focus on what Caleb needs, Elena replied. Victoria's smile didn't reach her eyes. I hope that's true. Because if you think for a moment this role extends beyond that, you'll find the Lawson family far less hospitable. Elena held her ground. I'm here for Caleb, that's all. Victoria's head tilted, the smile sharpening. Good. Then you won't mind staying in your place. She turned and left as quietly as she had come, but the faint scent of her perfume seemed to linger like a warning. Later that evening, Daniel found Elena in the hallway outside Caleb's room. She came to see you, he said. Yes. And? Elena looked at him evenly. She wanted to remind me where my place is. I told her it's beside Caleb until he no longer needs me. Something in Daniel's expression shifted. Not quite a smile, but an acknowledgment. Then, she's going to have a problem. The first sign came over morning coffee. Elena was in the kitchen tying Caleb's shoelaces when Daniel's phone buzzed on the counter. He glanced at it, intending to ignore it, but the subject line in bold letters stopped him cold. Lawson caretaker's secret past. Opportunist or hero. He opened the link. The article was from the Capital Times, a society tabloid with a reputation for surgical character assassination. A photo of Elena, cropped from the gala coverage, filled the top half of the page. She was mid-laugh, her hand on Caleb's shoulder, a candid moment that now looked calculated under the headline. The text was worse. It painted her as a social climber, strategically placing herself in the orbit of the Lawson fortune. It referenced her modest upbringing, her previous jobs, and even hinted, without evidence, at a pattern of attaching herself to vulnerable employers. The last paragraph carried a dagger wrapped in silk. While her dedication to young Caleb is undeniable, sources question whether her proximity to the family is altruistic or opportunistic. Daniel set the phone down, the muscles in his jaw hardening. Elena noticed. What is it? He hesitated, not to spare her, but to choose his words carefully. You're in the papers. She straightened, a flicker of dread passing over her features. Which papers? He handed her the phone. She read in silence, the color in her face neither rising nor draining. When she reached the end, she exhaled slowly. This is Victoria, she said simply. By midday, the article had been picked up by 2 other outlets. The phrasing changed, but the subtext was identical. Elena Brooks was an interloper, and the Lawson family's recent image shift was suspicious. Daniel's PR team convened in his study. Damage control is possible, one advisor said, but the cleanest option is to quietly transition her out of the public eye. We can phrase it as time for a new chapter in Caleb's recovery. Daniel's gaze cut through the room. No. Daniel, I'm not going to hide her, he said, voice low but sharp. You think this story hurts us? Replacing her would confirm every poisonous word of it. The advisors exchanged uneasy glances. Then you'll need to counter the narrative, and do it publicly. That evening, at a dinner with several prominent donors, Daniel made his move. When the conversation inevitably drifted to Caleb's remarkable progress, one guest leaned toward Daniel. You must have found the right specialist at last. Daniel set down his glass. Not a specialist, he said. Elena Brooks. She's the one responsible for my nephew's recovery. There was a pause, the kind of silence that swells in a room when an unspoken rule has been broken. He continued, ignoring the subtle tightening of shoulders around him. She isn't here to elevate our image. She's here because Caleb trusts her, and trust has done more for him than any clinic in this city. When Elena heard about it later, from a staff member who had been serving at the dinner, she didn't smile. But something in her eyes softened when she saw Daniel pass her in the hallway. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly. "I did," he replied. "If I support you, it has to be where everyone can see it." She held his gaze for a moment, then nodded once. "Then we understand each other." It began with a feeling. Elena was walking Caleb back from his afternoon therapy session when the hair on the back of her neck rose. She glanced over her shoulder. Across the street, a dark sedan idled at the curb. The driver's face was obscured by the glare on the windshield. When she slowed her steps, the engine purred, and the car eased forward to match her pace. She said nothing to Caleb, only tightened her hold on his hand until they were safely inside the gates of the Lawson estate. That night, she found a folded slip of paper tucked under her windshield wiper. No words, just a blurry, zoomed-in photograph of her walking with Caleb, taken from across the street. The next morning, she showed the photo to Daniel in the study. His expression darkened. "Where was this?" "Yesterday, after therapy." He pressed a button on his desk phone. "Get security in here now." Minutes later, the head of security arrived, reviewing footage from the estate's exterior cameras. It took less than an hour to identify the license plate of the dark sedan. When the report landed on Daniel's desk, the connection was undeniable. The vehicle was registered to a logistics company tied to one of Victoria Hale's charitable foundations. The escalation didn't stop there. Within days, more online posts appeared, photos of Elena in public, all cropped to look suspicious. One showed her entering a grocery store with Caleb, the caption implying she was parading him for sympathy. Another was taken at a pharmacy, the angle making it appear she was arguing with a cashier. "I've dealt with attacks before," Daniel told her one evening, "but this is precision work. She's trying to push you out without ever touching you directly." Later that week, security caught a man attempting to slip onto the property through a service gate. He was carrying a small camera with a telephoto lens. Under questioning, he admitted he had been hired to get candid shots of Elena, and that his payment came from a fund administered by one of Victoria's associates. 2 days later, Victoria arrived at the estate without warning. She found Elena alone in the kitchen, arranging a tray for Caleb's snack. "I'll be direct," Victoria said, her tone as smooth as polished glass. "You have 2 choices. Leave now, and I'll see that you're compensated generously, or stay, and watch this get far uglier than you can imagine." Elena set down the tray and met her gaze. "Caleb's trust is not for sale." Victoria's lips curved faintly, but her eyes were cold. "Then you'd better hope you're stronger than you look." She left without another word, her heels clicking against the marble in perfect rhythm, like a countdown. That night, Daniel told Elena he was filing for legal action against his sister. "This isn't just about you anymore," he said. "It's about Caleb's safety, and I'm done letting her play her games unchecked." Elena only nodded, but inside, she knew the fight was just beginning, and that Victoria had no intention of retreating quietly. The idea came to Elena in the quiet between Caleb's breaths. He had fallen asleep on the couch in the sunroom, the late afternoon light slanting through the tall windows, gilding the edges of his hair. His legs were curled slightly. The blanket pooled at his waist, and one small hand rested on the stuffed lion he carried almost everywhere. She sat beside him, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing, thinking about the storm brewing outside these walls, the photographs, the whispers, the thinly veiled threats. Victoria had control of the narrative. It was something Elena hadn't wanted to admit, but each headline and twisted photograph made it clearer. As long as the public only saw her through the lens of scandal, they would fill in the blanks with whatever poison Victoria supplied. Daniel's private support was strong, but she knew it wasn't enough. She needed to take the story from Victoria's hands and put it somewhere she could hold it up to the light. When Daniel came in later that evening, loosening his tie, she spoke without preamble. "I want to show them," she said. He paused. "Show who what?" "Everyone. I want to show Caleb's progress. Not in a doctored photograph or a gossip column, but in person. A demonstration. Medical staff, neighbors, maybe even some press. Let them see with their own eyes what he's done." Daniel leaned against the doorframe, arms folded. "That's risky." "It's the only way," she replied. "If they see him take those steps, if they hear the applause, it won't matter what Victoria prints next week. The truth will already be out there." He considered her in silence for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he nodded once. "Then we do it on our terms." The days leading up to the event were a blur of planning. Daniel's team handled the logistics, arranging seating in the garden, notifying a carefully curated guest list, securing medical oversight. Elena worked with Caleb every morning, keeping the sessions short enough to avoid exhaustion, but long enough to build confidence. They practiced on the flagstone path between the fountain and the rose arbor. At first, Caleb still needed her fingertips grazing his elbow, but by the third day, he was making the distance on his own. The pride in his face was matched only by the stubborn set of his jaw. "I'm going to do it in front of everyone," he said one morning, panting slightly but smiling. "Yes, you are," Elena told him. The morning of the demonstration broke bright and clear, the kind of early spring day that felt like a deliberate blessing. So the garden was alive with color, tulips nodding in the breeze, the fountain casting silver arcs into the air. Folding chairs were arranged in neat rows facing the path, and a white canvas canopy stretched overhead to soften the sunlight. By noon, the guests began to arrive. Daniel's lawyers, several local reporters, 2 of Caleb's doctors, a handful of neighbors, and, at Daniel's quiet insistence, members of the Lawson family board. From her place near the starting point, Elena could feel the weight of every gaze. Some were curious, others skeptical, and at least one, from the back row, coldly appraising. Victoria sat there, immaculate as ever, her sunglasses hiding her eyes, her lips curved in that faint, knowing smile. Elena knelt beside Caleb, who was dressed in a crisp white shirt and soft gray trousers. "Remember," she said softly, "you don't have to go fast. You just have to go." He nodded, gripping the small lion in one hand. Daniel stepped up to address the crowd. His voice was steady, but Elena could hear the undercurrent of defiance. "Thank you all for coming. You've heard rumors, you've seen photos, and some of you have been told stories about this boy and the woman standing beside him. Today you'll see for yourselves what's real." A murmur rippled through the chairs. "Caleb," Daniel continued, "would you like to show them what you've been working on?" The boy nodded. Elena rose, stepping back just far enough to give him space. Her hands were at her sides, not extended toward him. She wanted them to see that. Caleb took his first step. It was deliberate, careful. His eyes locked not on the crowd, but on Elena's face. She gave him the smallest nod. He took another, and another. Halfway down the path, there was a faint tremor in his legs, but he kept going. The sound of the fountain mingled with the soft intake of breath from the audience. Somewhere behind them, a bird called, its note sharp in the still air, and then he reached her. Elena dropped to one knee, wrapping her arms around him, not to hold him up, but to hold him close. For a heartbeat, the garden was silent. Then the applause began. It wasn't polite or measured. It was sudden, full, and warm. Doctors stood, neighbors smiled. Even the reporters lowered their cameras for a moment to clap. From the back, Victoria removed her sunglasses, her expression unreadable. After the guests drifted away, a few lingering reporters asked for statements. Daniel spoke first, framing Caleb's achievement as a testament to perseverance, and making it clear Elena had been central to it. When someone asked Elena how she felt about the rumors surrounding her, she shook her head. "Rumors don't walk a path," she said. "Caleb did that today. That's all that matters to me." Later, as the sun dipped behind the trees, Elena sat on the low stone wall by the fountain, watching Caleb chase a paper boat in the water. Daniel joined her, hands in his pockets. "You did it," he said quietly. "We did it," she corrected. He glanced toward the back of the garden where Victoria had stood earlier. "She's not done." "I know," Elena replied, "but neither am I." For the first time in weeks, she felt the balance shift, not in her favor entirely, but away from the place where Victoria had all the control. The truth was no longer a secret whispered in hallways. It had been seen, felt, and applauded, and that, Elena thought, was a seed Victoria could not uproot, no matter how deep she tried to dig. The demonstration had been a turning point, and Victoria knew it. For a week afterward, the air around the Lawson estate seemed lighter. Caleb's doctors sent notes of congratulations, neighbors stopped by with flowers, and even the tabloids printed a rare neutral headline. But beneath the new calm, Elena felt it, a faint vibration, the kind you get standing too close to a fence when a storm is moving in. It was almost midnight when the storm arrived. The sound was small at first, a metallic click from somewhere near the east side of the property. Elena had been in her apartment reviewing notes for Caleb's next therapy plan when she heard it. Her first thought was that it was one of the groundskeepers locking up late, but then she heard the second sound, the quiet snick of a latch being eased open. She stepped to her window. A shadow moved along the garden wall, dark against the lighter gravel path. The figure crouched, slipping toward the main house. Elena's heart slammed once, hard, then settled into a steady, cold rhythm. She grabbed her phone and called security. By the time 2 guards intercepted the man, he was near the service entrance, camera in hand, lens extended, its grip wrapped in black tape. He didn't resist when they restrained him. In the security office, Daniel stood beside Elena, watching the footage play back. The intruder had moved with purpose, avoiding well-lit areas, aiming his lens toward the sunroom and the hallway outside Caleb's bedroom. "What was he planning to take pictures of?" Daniel asked. The guard placed a small evidence bag on the desk. Inside was a folded sheet of paper, a printed schedule of Caleb's daily routine, complete with times and locations. Elena's stomach tightened. "Where did he get this?" The guard hesitated, then said, "We checked his phone. Payment transfers came from a private account linked to the Hale Foundation." Daniel's gaze darkened. "Victoria." The next morning, Daniel's legal team began compiling a case file, photographs, payment records, witness statements from the guards. It wasn't enough for a criminal conviction yet, but the pattern was impossible to ignore. The smear campaign, the surveillance, now a physical breach of the property. That afternoon, Victoria made her next move. Daniel was in the study when his assistant entered, holding a thick envelope. "From Victoria's lawyers," she said. Inside was an emergency injunction filing, a formal request to have Elena removed as Caleb's caretaker for the child's safety and emotional stability. Elena read the opening paragraph, then set it down slowly. "She's going to use her own crime as proof I shouldn't be here," Elena said. Daniel's jaw tightened. "Not if I have anything to say about it." That night, after Caleb was asleep, Elena walked through the quiet halls of the estate. The lights were low, the air cool with the faint scent of polished wood and lemon oil. She paused at the glass doors to the courtyard, the same courtyard where Daniel had first confronted her weeks ago. Back then, she'd felt cornered. Now she felt something sharper. Resolve. Victoria wanted her gone because Caleb was improving. because the boy's trust was a currency she couldn't buy. And if Victoria thought intimidation and paperwork could break that, she didn't understand who she was dealing with. The courthouse smelled faintly of coffee and polished wood, a scent that seemed to cling to the air no matter the season. Elena sat at the long oak table beside Daniel and his lead attorney, the stack of documents in front of her feeling heavier than paper had any right to be. Across the aisle, Victoria Hale occupied her place like a queen on foreign soil, poised, immaculate, her legal team forming a perfect wall of dark suits. Her eyes slid over Elena once, as if confirming she was still here, still in the fight. The bailiff called the session to order. Victoria's lawyer rose first. His voice was smooth, almost sympathetic, as he laid out the request for an emergency injunction. "This is not about animosity," he told the judge. "This is about ensuring the emotional stability of a child who has endured significant medical challenges. Ms. Brooks, though perhaps well-meaning, is unqualified for the role she has assumed. Her background raises questions. Her public behavior invites scrutiny. And recent events, including unauthorized individuals breaching the Lawson estate, demonstrate that her presence attracts risk." He said it all without raising his voice, as if presenting an undeniable equation. When it was their turn, Daniel's attorney stood, his tone clipped but steady. "Your Honor, the petitioner conveniently omits that the so-called unauthorized individuals were hired through accounts linked to Ms. Hale's own charitable foundation. Furthermore, the child's medical team unanimously credits Ms. Brooks with progress that no other professional achieved. This is not hearsay. It is documented fact." He called the first witness, Caleb's lead physical therapist. The woman spoke clearly, detailing Caleb's milestones, the techniques Elena used to build his confidence, the measurable gains in his mobility. "She doesn't just work on his walking," the therapist said. "She works on his will to walk. That's the part you can't teach in a clinic." Then it was Daniel's turn. He rose, buttoning his jacket, and stepped to the witness stand. His voice carried a weight that was different from the boardroom command Elena had seen before. "When my sister first told me Elena was a liability, I believed her," he said. "I was wrong. I saw with my own eyes what Elena did for my nephew, things no expensive program had managed. She gave him more than therapy. She gave him courage. And I will not stand here and pretend that's replaceable." There was no mistaking the way some of the reporters in the back of the room leaned forward, pens moving faster. When Elena herself was called, she kept her eyes on the judge. "I'm not here to protect my reputation," she said. "I'm here to protect Caleb's progress. His trust is fragile, and it took a long time to build. Removing me now would set him back in ways you can't measure in charts." Her voice didn't waver, not even when Victoria's lawyer tried to needle her about the smear articles. "Those stories don't walk a path," she replied calmly. "Caleb does, and he does it better every week." The closing arguments were short. The judge leaned back, fingers steepled, then delivered the decision in measured tones. "The evidence shows that under Ms. Brooks's care, the child's condition has improved significantly. There is no compelling proof that her presence poses harm. The petition for injunction is denied." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Victoria's jaw tightened, but she didn't look at Elena. Daniel placed a hand briefly on Elena's shoulder as they rose. It was not a gesture of triumph, but of solidarity. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed as they walked down the steps together, Caleb between them, holding Elena's hand. No statement was given. None was needed. The image, the boy flanked by the man who had once doubted her and the woman who had refused to leave, was enough to tell the story. The search warrant came 2 weeks after the courtroom decision. It was early morning when the police arrived at Victoria Hale's residence, a sleek glass and steel home perched above the city like a watchtower. Elena wasn't there to see it, but Daniel described it later. Officers in navy jackets moving with brisk precision, carrying out computer towers, file boxes, and a slim black case that held 3 cameras with telephoto lenses. Inside one of the hard drives, investigators found a folder labeled Family Watch. The contents were worse than anyone expected. Months of surveillance photos of Elena, Caleb, and even other staff at the Lawson estate. Payment records traced directly to shell accounts controlled by Victoria. There were copies of schedules, transcripts of overheard conversations, and strategy notes on how to apply pressure until removal. The charges came quickly: stalking, conspiracy, unlawful surveillance, and witness intimidation. When the trial began, Elena testified calmly, recounting the night of the break-in, the threats, and the smear campaign. She didn't embellish or linger. The facts were enough. Victoria's defense tried to paint her as overly sensitive, claiming the surveillance was due diligence for the family's protection. But the paper trail was too clean, the payments too precise. In the end, the jury took less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Months later, the garden looked different. Not in its layout. The fountain still stood at the center, the stone path winding past the rose arbor, but in its air. The weight that had hung over the estate for so long was gone. Elena stood near the fountain, watching Caleb from a short distance. He wasn't walking anymore. He was running. His steps were quick, sure, almost joyful. The stuffed lion was long gone, replaced by a small soccer ball he kicked ahead of him before darting after it. His laughter echoed against the courtyard walls, bright and unbroken. Daniel came to stand beside her. "You realize he's going to outrun you soon?" She smiled. "That's the idea." They watched as Caleb stopped, spotted Elena, and without hesitation sprinted the last few yards into her arms. She caught him, lifting him briefly before setting him back down on steady feet. For a moment, the 3 of them stood there, sunlight spilling over the stone, the sound of the fountain behind them. Elena knew the world outside these walls would keep its opinions. Some would still cling to the old headlines, the whispers. But here, in the garden where everything had begun, none of that mattered. Respect, she thought, wasn't inherited like a family name. It was earned, step by step, choice by choice, in the moments when defending what's right cost more than silence. And today, the cost felt worth every battle. Thank you for staying with us until the very last moment of this story. If it moved you even just a little, then Caleb's journey and Elena's fight has done its job. Stories like these remind us that courage is not loud and respect is not inherited. Sometimes, the smallest steps change everything. If you believe in standing by what's right, share this story. And if you've ever fought for someone when no one else would, know this: the world is better because of people like you. Until next time, take care of each other.